Okay, so last time I told you I was going on a genealogy journey into Jamaica, into my family, into what was hidden and what was never meant to be found. Today, I'm telling you what I found. But I want to be upfront about two things before I start. First, this is months of work. I'm not going to pretend I sat down one afternoon and figured this all out. This has been late night, dead ends, database rabbit holes, and a lot of emails to archives and countries I'm not in. So what I'm sharing with you today is the summary of a process. The whole story is still unfolding. Second, what I'm covering in this post is specifically my paternal grandfather's lineage. One line, one side. There are other sides of the family, other stories. Today, we are starting in Manchester, and we are starting with the Preddies. So let me talk about something I didn't expect to be talking about in all this, and that is gatekeeping. Because here's one thing, our records exist, birth certificates, marriage records, census documents, they're out there, but accessing them, that's a different story. So Ancestry.com has partnered with governments around the world to digitize these records, but you need a paid subscription to access them. FamilySearch, which is run by the Mormon Church, is free, but you do need to sign up, and of course that means you are sharing your data to get your data. The Legacies of British Slavery database, though, at University College London, it's powerful. But it was built to track slave owners, not the enslaved. So right away, you can see the gaps. People who were never meant to be remembered are still, in many ways, not being remembered. And I just want to name that because before I tell you what I found, I think it matters that we understand the condition and by whom. Okay, here is where it gets personal. I started with my last name, Preddie. And in the Legacies of Slavery database, I found a Barbara Preddie spelt with an I, not an E. I followed her. When she died in 1822, the people she owned, my family, were passed on. First to someone named Whitaker, then to someone named Thomas Hersey Barrett, who owned a significant amount of land in an area of Jamaica I know well. And that's because that's where my grandfather owned land, where my father was baptized, where my uncle is buried, and where my grandparents were married. So that is not a coincidence. That, my friend, is lineage. Okay, so then I went back to the Legacies database to find out what happened after emancipation. After the enslaved people were freed, the British government compensated the slave owners for their loss of property. The Barretts received a significant sum. The amount was so large that the British government didn't finish paying back all of these slave owners until 2015. That money, that debt was still being settled in our lifetime. So after emancipation, a lot of land in the area was purchased by churches, the Quakers, Moravian, Seventh-day Adventist, which is the church I grew up in. They bought a lot of land and gave portions of it to the formerly enslaved, but it wasn't freedom exactly. It was closer to what sharecroppers experienced in the American South, a system called apprenticeship. So you worked the land, but in exchange, you got to stay. And that's the land that Thomas Hersey Barrett owned. It's eventually where my grandfather settled and where my father grew up, and that's in Manchester, Jamaica. So I reached out to the National Land Trust of Jamaica, and they confirmed that this land was owned by Barrett. And in his will, he left the land and on it to his children. So my next step is to find out when that land was transferred, when it went from the Barrett estate to someone who eventually sold it or gave it to my family, and that's the missing link. And the National Land Trust can help me get there one deed at a time, but it's 800 Jamaican dollars per request. Ancestry.com was frustrating because there wasn't much there for my Jamaican records, but Ancestry.co.uk had more, which given the colonial history. And FamilySearch opened up something entirely different, handwritten christening records, birth records, death records. And some of those names matched what my dad had already given me. There were also discrepancies, birth dates that didn't line up, which actually revealed an extra layer of Preddie we hadn't accounted for, a generation we didn't even know was there. So those records also show vocations, what people did, and that detail alone confirmed what I've been piecing together about the Barrett land. I then took everything, every name, every date, every connection, and ran it through AI to help me synthesize the story and surface sources and then verify independently and kind of help me put the map together. But here's where I hit a wall. My great-great-great-grandfather, I believe he was the first free person in my family, and that places him mid to late 1800s. I can't get further back than him, though not yet. Part of the challenge that so many enslaved people are only recorded with one name, but by design, anonymity was a tool of control. My grandfather's mother is another gap. She was from Port Antonio, kind of the opposite end of the island from Manchester. And my grandfather was born in Manchester, but unmarried when they found him. So I need to figure out how that story. I also want to trace the land ownership in Manchester more precisely, from the Barrett estate to my grandfather. So this may mean a trip to Kew, which is the National Archives in the UK, where the slave registries for the British colonies are held. And I want to talk about what those actually contain, because it's both more and less than you would expect. So from 1817 onward, plantation owners in Jamaica were required by abolitionists who were trying to prove the slave trade was still happening to register every enslaved person on the property. So what you get is a list of names, and alongside their names, age, role in the plantation, and class. The words were Black, Creole, meaning born on the island, and mulatto, which is used for someone like me. The last detail matters personally because it tells you something about what was happening on those plantations that nobody was supposed to talk about. What I can't trace through Q is the names that move, and this is what's been striking. A lot of the same names appeared on Barbara Preddie's, and then the Whitakers and the Barretts, and that continuity is how I've been able to follow my family through these transfers of ownership, because even when these people were treated as property, they held on to something. But what I cannot find is a clean, standardized record pre-1817. And I want to be precise about this because I've learned that the wall isn't quite as absolute as it first appeared, and it's more likely going to get more difficult to navigate. So the official British colony slave registries, the ones the research used, are held in the T71 series at Kew, and that's the official registry of colonial slaves. So these cover from 1813 to 1834. And that's what gives you a list. For 1813 to 1827, Britain did not have a centralized registration system. So records that exist at Kew are scattered registries, not full names of enslaved people, just plantation records, estate papers, and legal documents, but not the kind of systematic link that lets you say, here's a person, here is their name, and here is their age. So the wall isn't 1817 exactly, it's before that. Feels like to look for yourself in history and keep finding that record building was not built for you. But also, this is the part that keeps me going. It's what feels like something to find anyway. A name, a land record, a handwritten christening entry, a will that listed my family as property, and also something that told me exactly where they were, where we were never meant to be. But here we are. I'll keep you posted.